Jack was not a dreamer, but that night he had the most amazing, vivid dream. Jack dreamt that he woke up in his bed feeling as peaceful and relaxed as he had ever been. Jack then felt something stir in his chest, a warm, glowing feeling. He looked down to see something small and green slowly emerge from his chest. It was a tree. The feeling grew, and grass sprung up around the tree. And then another tree grew, and another, until there was a whole forest with flowers and streams. The feeling grew more intense. It was the best sensation he had ever felt. Jack looked down to see birds and squirrels in the trees. Rabbits scampered on the ground, and then from the trees came a deer, and he could feel the tiny hooves tap across his chest. It was the most gentle, delightful touch, as if it were tickling him as it walked. Another deer, and then another appeared. One went to take a drink from a small pond when Jack saw the orange glowing eyes of a mountain lion jump out from the darkness of the trees and kill the deer. Jack wasn't hurt or scared. He saw the lion eat and leave the remains, which fell back into Jack's chest. And where the deer had lain, ferns and flowers and trees sprung up, filling him with more life. Life. Jack had never felt more alive. In the morning, Jack woke and felt clean. He was exhausted, but he still had the residual feeling from his dream, which left his mind lucid and untainted. Jack didn't have any questions in his head anymore. He knew what he was going to do, so he started packing. From his apartment, he called a cab to pick him up at the diner, and then he took his 2 bags and headed down there. Evidence of an epic party was all over. Streamers in the street, bottles and cups lay about, and some people walked about holding their heads in pain or trying to find a lost shoe. It got more noticeable as he got closer to the diner. When he reached it, people were passed out on the step and in the booths. Slowly, people were rising and gaining their bearings. It looked like the whole town had gone wild. Paul was walking out of the diner, wiping his face as Jack crossed the street. Paul saw his bags. "You really going?" asked Paul. "Yeah," answered Jack. "Cab should be here in a minute." Others started to get up and crowd around to see Jack off. "Are you sure?" said Paul. "I mean, you're so close." The taxi came around the corner. "Look," said Jack, "I don't know what all this is, and frankly, I don't care anymore. All I know, it's just not for me." A good-sized crowd had formed. They looked hungover, but they all seemed to share Paul's sentiment and concern for Jack. The cab pulled up. "Well then," said Paul, "all right, you take care." Paul put out his hand, and Jack shook it. Jack walked around the cab and threw his bags in. He stood up and gave Paul a nod, and just as he was about to step in the cab, thwack! A baseball cracked Jack right in the skull. Jack spun around, holding his head, and saw the little boy in his baseball uniform standing in the middle of the street. All of that peace that Jack had felt that morning was replaced with blinding rage. This was the last straw. Jack stormed towards the child. Jack could hear Paul following behind him, trying to dissuade him. "Jack, don't!" But he couldn't help himself. Paul sounded miles away. Jack grabbed the kid by both arms and lifted him up to eye level. Jack ignored the burning pain in his shoulder from the gunshot wound. He began shaking the child, but the child didn't protest. He just looked back into Jack's eyes without expression. Jack was screaming with unbound fury. "Look, you little..." And then Jack saw something in the child's eyes. At first, it was the reflection of Jack's confused and rage-filled face, but there was something behind that reflection. Jack held the child close, and in his eyes, he saw stars. Not a few stars, but billions of shining, burning stars. Whole galaxies spinning in open space. Nebulas, explosions, swirls of light. "Oh my God," said Jack, dropping the child to the ground. "You're him. You're the one." Jack turned back to Paul. "Paul, he's the..." And as he tried to finish the sentence, he saw the same in Paul's eyes. An expanding universe of sparkling stars bursting like a grand fireworks show. "Paul, you're the..." And Jack looked at the mob of people behind Paul, all standing with their arms at their sides, all with exploding, sparkling eyes. Jack started seeing through the people's forms, and through them, more and more stars, more and more galaxies. It was too much. Jack covered his eyes and looked away, but his hands became transparent with stars. He saw the space in between the atoms of his hands, the neurons and electrons looking like planets orbiting stars. He saw through his hands to a tree on the other side of the street, more stars running up and down the roots like highways of illumination. It was too much. Jack was spinning. He felt faint. It was all too much. He fell face forward towards the ground, but when he hit it, he fell right through. Fell and fell, light passing him all the way. He felt no body. He felt no mind. He was rushing down a tunnel of light. It's difficult to say what happened to Jack next. Words have a hard time describing it. They can't tell what happened, but they can point towards it, like a hand pointing to the moon. Jack was in a forest, his forest, the one from his dreams. He was standing on himself, in front of the small pond where the deer had fell. The foliage was dense on that spot. Jack looked at the trees and didn't see trees. They had full green leaves and rough brown bark and deep, rich roots, but he wasn't seeing trees. Jack exhaled a deep breath, and he felt the trees inhale. The trees exhaled a sweet breath of oxygen, and Jack inhaled, the gases filling up his lungs, deep into his bronchial tubes. But they weren't bronchial tubes. They were trees. And the trees weren't outside of himself. They were his lungs. And there was no himself. Jack and the trees were one being. Jack was waiting in consciousness. No separation, no me and you, us and them. Nothing owned and nothing given. Nothing gained and nothing lost. Just one. Jack fell to his knees as if in slow motion, and the landscape changed. The trees grew. Pavement appeared under Jack's feet. Jack was the pavement. Boxes of buildings shot up around him. He was the boxes. His knees hit the ground, and people appeared around him, comforting him. Jack was the people. The people were Jack. They were one. Jack broke into tears on the street. He was comforted by Paul, Julie, Smitty, and the others. Jack had been paroled to no one, and his parole was over. The next week, Jack found himself with his bags on the street again. Paul and a few other friends were seeing him off. The town had gotten back to normal. A taxi was coming from down the street. "Thank you, Paul," said Jack, and he shook his hand. Paul looked at Jack knowingly and gave him a smile. "Don't be a stranger, you hear?" said Smitty. Jack walked to the cab. Jack took a deep breath and looked all around him. He was quiet, content, and at peace. He stepped into the cab and gave one last wave to the others as it pulled away. Paul, Smitty, Ronald, Julie, and Jimmy all walked off the street back to their own business. The street was empty and peaceful, with all the calm sounds of a small town. Peace was only broken temporarily by the sounds of another cab pulling up.